Hey guys, welcome back or welcome to Conscious Conversations. My name's Luke McLean. Looking forward to this episode. This is going to be a good one. So, I hope you've got, your notepad and pen and you've got some space to take a few notes. What is Conscious Conversations? If this is the first time you've been on the podcast, it's a podcast that really talks to people who I believe are living really purposeful, authentic, and intentional lives. And what I try to do is sort of talk to their story and really explore their teachings, their mindset, and sort of how they see the world and what they've learned from that. So, that's the podcast. And it's, they usually go for about an hour. All spectrums of life, really, which I love, is like today we're going to talk about leadership and culture. I do a lot of mindfulness and meditation, well-being, all sorts of stuff. So, it's really cool and I love it. So I'd like to get more episodes up, but, it takes time. It takes time. A little bit about me is that, I'm a life coach and I'm a meditation teacher with a lot of wellness experience in the background. So what I do is I do a lot of work with leaders, with parents, with men as a coach in how to help them step into their authentic self, how to increase their well-being and deliver that through, really clear pathways, practices, behaviors, commitments, ceremonies, things like that. So right now, it's a good time. I'm taking some coaching bookings right now, trying to build up my coaching portfolio. So, if you're interested in elevating performance and, I've been thinking about this question for a while, but, why do life coaching or why do wellness coaching? And, the best way I can explain it, and I think this connects so well to this podcast, is it's about wanting to either create change and get better. So if you want to get better at something, whether you want to get better at football, if you want to get better at piano, whatever it is, you'll generally get a teacher or a coach, someone to help you improve. So, if your wellness is down, if you've got poor habits, if you're overweight, if you're feeling, unhappy, highly stressed, wellness is a really holistic look at it, or you're feeling just disconnected from your best version of you, then that's what a wellness and a life coach really does. It helps provide the clarity, the resources, the tools, and the support to really get back on track to live that best version of yourself. And that's what a coach does. It helps you get better. And a lot of the people that I work with actually aren't a long way off track. They're high performance people that see their well-being and see mindfulness as a performance tool. That's that pointy end of performance, needing to get every extra edge, I suppose. And again, that's performance. It's about getting better. And I just think I did a post this week, but we've got to create a new normal. We've got to get better. We've got to continue to grow every day. And I'm so big on this at the moment, where we are nowhere near our capacity of human potential, with our well-being, with the amount of energy that we have, with how we feel, with the clarity and space we've got, mentally, how connected we are to ourselves spiritually. I just don't think we're tapping our potential anywhere near it. And that's really exciting for me as a coach, to want to work with people who go, actually, I think my ceiling of potential as a human is a lot higher than it actually is. Even though I might materially have everything I need, I think I've got a lot more in me. And they're the clients that I really love. So that's sorry about the rant, but that's a little bit about what I do. So you can hook me up at Luke underscore McLean coach on Instagram, or Kinfolk Wellness Studio. Just go and check that out. Now the podcast. Let's get to the good stuff. Shane McCurry is, he's a organizational leadership and culture expert, and he's a thought leader. So, Shane's a really interesting guy, super humble, super intelligent and smart. He's, really always at the cutting edge of what's next and what's happening. He's, loves to read, loves to research, loves to connect with people. And, I've known Shane a long time. He was actually a manager of mine, and, when we were at Cotton On together, and he's a great guy, and we had some challenging times when we worked together, but he left and he went on his own. He went for a holiday and a bit of self-discovery, and he sort of came back, and he's just come on in leaps and bounds. And I guess the biggest success story for him was the leadership and organisational development work he's done with the Richmond Footy Club over the past 3 years. So Richmond got him in to really help sort of be a key part of that leadership and culture piece that Richmond went through 3 years ago. In case you don't know, Richmond's a football club that, was really just underachieving for a long time, and they had the courage to sort of step out and rebuild themselves as a team, to look at how they see football and growing individuals and young men differently. How the coach really did a lot of self-reflection, Damien Hardwick, on himself, and really were brave in this. And Shane played a big part in this, and what the outcome was a success on the field, which I've discovered. I got to go on tour the Richmond Footy Club with Shane, but success on the field, but really creating an environment for people just to show up and be better. That was probably the thing I got when I saw the facility and saw the stories behind what they try and do, is that they just want to create better people, and that's huge. And the belief is, if they've got more engaged, more energized, more courageous people that celebrate and really love what they do every day, the outcome of performance, the outcome of premierships will take care of itself. And I think that's an important lesson that we'll talk through in the podcast. So Shane does a lot of work with them. He does work with Melbourne Storm. He's done work with, the Army. Sort of worked through a lot of Parramatta Eels. He really works with a lot of different high-performance companies. So I'm really excited to get Shane on the podcast and talk through what he sees leadership and culture really being. He gives a whole bunch of references and resources that I'll share the links in the show notes too. But really cool, really high-performance conversation. So I do encourage you to grab your notepad and pen and take some notes if you need it. But, this is Conscious Conversations. My name's Luke McLean, and I hope you enjoy it.
Well, it was funny, we were starting to chat about, and you were talking about, which I think was really relative, talking about the guy in Byron that does rituals and ceremonies, and sort of just mentioning the work that he was doing.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Which I thought was, important, especially for what we're chatting about with what's currently happening in the environment, is the importance of keeping ritual and ceremony and tradition within your day, or having a purpose. But for many, as you and I have discussed many times, it's sort of got lost in modern life, is the importance of having high quality ceremonies and rituals, with, especially amongst young people, but even older people.
Yeah, well, it's probably, I think, from a workplace viewpoint, is that there's real power in tapping into that, and identifying what do you think are the rituals that will help your team or your broader business, become more informed about what they're there to do, I suppose, what they're achieving, the progress they're making along the way. But also, probably the most important of all of that is the opportunity to celebrate who they are. And I think that's the piece that moves from that corporate area or work and business into life as well too, is that those rituals that we have in a life sense are very much designed around celebration. Celebrating your life as a person. Birthday is probably a great example of that. Celebrating relationships, anniversaries, or celebrating the entry of one person into a new group of people or a new community. In the context of baptisms, I suppose, or first day at school, or graduation ceremonies, first day high school, so on and so forth. All of those really important rites and rituals. So, and I know Anna's of the view that what we're going through at the moment as a society is also a form of rite of passage as well too. So yeah, it's certainly beyond the scope of my expertise to talk too much about that piece, but I love it in the context of workplace culture, because I think that we sometimes can fall in that trap of just getting sucked into that, going to work, working, going home from work without really stopping to think about how that work is actually adding value and meaning to your life. And it's not until something like this happens that we're facing at the moment where you get that taken away from you. So people who are driven, ambitious, career-oriented, if you're in an industry that is affected by what we're going through right now, and most people are, let's be honest, then you have that taken away from you. And so where then do you find your meaning and purpose? Particularly when you can't go out and do the other things that you'd normally do. You've almost got to recreate that for yourself. And I think that's what Arna's talking about with this being a rite of passage for society, is that people are having to make a dramatic shift in the way that they live their life, but also the way that they do their work and the way that they derive that same meaning and satisfaction from every day that they would typically get from what they do in a work or in a personal sense. So it's a big challenge in that regard, but at the same time, you have to see the opportunity in that. And I think that's the hard part, because it has affected so many people, and everyone's affected in different ways. I think it's really important to say that is no two people have the same experience with this. Some people are severely impacted. Some people are somewhat impacted, and some people are minimally impacted, but we're all impacted in some way. And I think that for me is where it differs from what perhaps we've been through before in the past, when there's been things that have impacted the workplace or the environment, is that we are in this together. And I think that that's the part of the solution, is that we'll get out of it together. And we need to tap into our community and that notion of togetherness in order to get through in one piece, but also to make sure that we flourish and thrive on the other side.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things just within what you just said then that I'd like to dig into a little more. I think the first one, mate, when we're discussing that, is I'd love to just explore a little bit more around the work that you do, but also the importance of storytelling, the importance of rituals and celebrations amongst, in the workplace, the work that you do at sporting clubs, just how that's done really well, like what you've seen in terms of when that's done well, the impact it's done, but also teams or organizations, even within wellness that we know really well, organizations that have done that poorly and then given up on it because they haven't put the time in, like they conceptually understand it's important, but haven't actually gone to the depths to understand how it's done really well. They've just tried to do it to either, say wellness, for instance, to reduce sick leave, to reduce churn. And it's always a reductionistic perspective to try to minimize impact, as opposed to, what you and I talk a lot about is it's expansive. It's a chance to increase engagement, increase productivity, increase performance and well-being as a performance tool, not as a reductionistic tool to try to reduce the harm.
Yeah, it all relates a bit to measurement, doesn't it? In a corporate sense or a workplace sense, if you spend time on something, you want to be able to see that it's giving you a return on your time. And I think that is the common commercial view, I suppose, is that if we're going to be spending money on something, or we're going to be investing time on something, or we're going to have it as a focus in our typical week to week, that we need to be able to see that it's giving us I hate using the word, the ROI, but we have to be seeing that it's giving us a return on investment. Now, and that's just a commercial reality, and I fully appreciate that. And working across a range of industries, is that you see some companies who have a high revenue, lots of disposable income to spend on things like that. Others are smaller businesses that probably don't have that same degree of flexibility. But what I'm always really pleased to see is that if leadership thinks that something is important, then they'll commit to it 110%. And so that there's plenty of precedents out there where smaller companies have invested in things that will give them a big lift in terms of performance or leadership or well-being, so on and so forth. Cotton On's a great example, and we've both sort of had some personal experience there over the journey, and I use Cotton On as a great example for people often, is that it's an amazing company because it's prepared to invest in its people in ways that other businesses don't, and has done that for a long period of time, but also has done that very organically as well too. So, I love that. And I'm sure, Luke, you've probably shared the origins of the Cotton On Health and Wellbeing program on the podcast at some stage around Nige, the owner, back in the day, just wanting to keep fit himself. And then the extension of that, wanting to keep his peers fit as well. And then engaging with yourself to come on and start running that program. I love that because it comes from such an organic platform, I suppose, is that it's not a big orchestrated goal or objective that's set. It's just an investment in doing the right thing. It's a bit like the Cotton On Foundation. Again, a great example of a company that believes very strongly in giving back to the community, but isn't in the business of just signing checks and handing it over as a lot of big businesses do. They actually want to genuinely invest in that as a program that evolves over time. So, but organic at its roots. That notion of Nigel meeting Father Nestus all those years ago at the baptism and saying, well, rather than just make a donation, how about I come across and visit and have a look around, and if like what we see, we might be able to form a partnership that lasts a long time. And that history shows you that what the Cotton On Foundation have done over there in Mania and in many other parts of the world is a real credit to them. So, yeah, I think that some companies will start looking at it as a return in investment rather than actually asking themselves, is this something that we ought to be doing because it's the right thing to do? And
do you see that? Do you see the better companies wanting to do it from an organic place, or do you find that companies and leaders that are trying to orchestrate a really specific ROI and to hold measures tight and accountability tight? What do you see as working the best as a cultural piece?
I think it depends on who comes up with the original idea. It's unrealistic to expect that your entire leadership team will buy into something straight away. So it has to start with an idea somewhere. And that's probably the important thing, is that if it starts with one leadership team member, for example, it doesn't have to be a leadership team member either. It could be an idea that someone within the business at another level of the business comes up with. If you think it's important enough that you throw your weight behind it. So I think that the ones where it does evolve organically probably tends to get far greater buy-in along the way. A lot of companies will try and do too much too soon. And I always say that you've got to embed it. And I'm a really big believer in that. And I spoke up at the AIS a couple of months ago to a group of about 300 athlete wellbeing professionals, and we're talking about the role of wellbeing in the modern day sports performance department and how that's evolved over time. When I say sports performance, I'm not talking about physical performance, but more in the athlete welfare and education piece in the scheme of the overall football program or tennis program, netball program, basketball program. You had all the Olympic sports there. And we were talking about how that has just organically grown over time, but where some organisations will dabble in it and others will fully invest. And, you can dabble with 100 things at any point in time. It makes it very difficult if you're doing that to judge the effectiveness of something. So the importance of being able to identify, well, what are those big ticket items? What are the things where we think that we might be able to get a return? Let's double down on that. Let's properly embed it. And when I say embed it doesn't mean spending millions of dollars, for example. That can just be allocating a sufficient amount of time to do it justice. And it could also be, rather than, making it optional, making it compulsory for a period of time. Again, I think it really is a horses for courses thing. You have to make a judgment about whether making something compulsory is appropriate. In some cases it won't be, but you might, toy with ideas around, well, if we're going to introduce a new initiative, let's say it's a leadership program or a wellbeing program, then you might say the expectation is that you attend the first 3 sessions. And then after that, it's up to you whether you continue to be involved or not. I think that's a great way to just think about how do we make sure that we give people, if something's different that we introduce, make sure we give people an opportunity to fully realise whether it's something that might add value to them or not before we give them a chance to opt out. But yeah, organic for sure, Luke, is going to be far, far more effective, I think. But it really doesn't matter where the idea comes from. I think the key is to have a good plan around how it will evolve, and then also, how you're going to go about generating buy-in along the way. So that's a constant effort, as we know.
Well, and I think what you say there, mate, it's the philosophy of what you sort of shared there is almost a philosophy for life. Like, focus on less, embed more, get traction, and then go again, rather than throwing 30 balls in the air and trying to do everything for everyone, and then you do it more poorly or for your well-being or whatever that ideal is. It's just a common sense approach to try to get traction on less and do it well, and then go from there.
Yeah, and it probably does relate to not just life, but to business. Many areas in business, whether it's setting goals or building a strategic plan or creating a leadership development program, is trying to be really clear and focused on what's that one thing, or what are those three things, or what are those five things that we think are going to give us, where should we start? I suppose what are those things that are going to give us the greatest return? So I'm a big believer in the power of those numbers as well too. What's that one thing? What are those three things? What are those five things? There's a lot of research being done just around the impact of the presentation of information, or the structure of programs, or the use of buckets and pillars in a plan sense. So, tapping into some of that research that's out there around the presentation of information or concepts, I think is quite a good one. Also with, speech writing as well too, and creating presentations, encourage people to do presentation skills coaching to think about what are those 3 points that they want to make, or what are those 5 points that they want to make throughout their talk, and zeroing in on that. So I think that can be beneficial in a range of different scenarios.
And how do you see the fluidity of that? Again, that presentation, speaking, buckets, all the stuff that gets presented, but then what's the glue that actually gets that to action? Because again, we see 1,000 presentations and different things that can come across and be given to playing groups, to be given to leadership teams, but what do you find in your experience and research that actually then formulates traction and impact and progress?
From an individual presentation skill sets, or with broader team programs, Luke?
I think with broader team programs, in terms of actually getting, rubber on the road, to actually taking it from an idea or a concept on a PowerPoint to actually, how does that become part of our culture?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a really big believer in the power of co-design. So that notion of there's going to be a lot of experts that operate in and around business and in and around sport. And it's easy, and this is in any industry as well too, I'm talking about here, is that it's easy for the leaders, because they're probably going to be the subject matter experts, and they've probably been involved for decades. And it's easy for them to come in and say, this is what I think we should do, let's go and do it. in the way that I'm telling you we should do it. Now, that's the easy option, and it'll have a certain degree of impact, which is great, so you get to tick that box. But the real power is in when you co-design something. And I think particularly more now than ever before in the past, the opportunity to engage with younger staff, if you run a co-design process for anything that you introduce into the workplace, is enormously powerful. So, and that probably comes a bit out of Silicon Valley, as a strategy that a number of the successful tech startups have used for the last 50 years and been incredibly successful as a result. But that notion of creating something together, which means that it's going to take longer. There's no doubt. It'll stretch out the time frame that you need in the development phase. But what you create will be so much more impactful and so much more sustainable in the long run if it's co-created. Yeah. And that's down to even like the language. I think that's a really important part of it, is using a language that is not generic, and it's not cliche, and it's not jargon. And this gets a bit to the storytelling as well too, Luke, which you asked about before. But it enables you through a co-design process to actually identify what's the common language across the group. These groups that I'm speaking with, what are the phrases, the words, the sentences, the examples that they're using that we might be able to attach to work into the comm strategy or the content or the session plan or the delivery mechanism. So I think that's a really important one, is what I'd say in terms of the actual development of those types of programs for sure. I was talking to a guy yesterday who I really rate highly and respect. He's been involved in AFL footy for many, many years, and he's been doing a lot of study while he's one of the staff that's unfortunately been stood down temporarily as part of the industry shutdown. And there's been at least probably 90-95% of the industry that are in the same boat. It's quite hard, that part of it. But he's used the opportunity to delve into some study and really kind of hone his skill set, both from a leadership, management and technical viewpoint. And it's a real credit to him. And he's been doing some stuff around or just even evaluating the quality of the presenters that share content over these online courses, whether they're here in Australia or overseas. And he's got kids as well too, and they're being homeschooled at the moment, as many other kids are, and even just paying attention to the teachers at the school and the way that they engage with people in an online setting. And it's caused him to think about his own presentation style and what's most important, because he said there's a lot of people who don't do that stuff very well at all. In fact, the people who don't do it well are probably in the majority. But then there's this small number who are able to do it and do it in a really, really effective way in order to engage with the audience, whether they're younger or older, but also to craft the delivery of content in a way that will capture maximum attention and create the most amount of learning. And for him, it boiled down to three things. The first one was energy and engagement was his first one. The second one was know your subject. And the third one was audience interaction. And I thought that was just such a simple little framework that he developed, but he'd done that over the last few weeks just through having pushed himself and improved himself and bettered himself over that last month while he's been sitting there, where he's taken action in order to make himself better and give himself some insights that he'll now be able to take back to the workplace for himself and for his peers. So for me, that was a great example of using what's happening at the moment as a launch pad, if you like, or a platform. Understanding it's incredibly difficult, and don't get me wrong, I'm certainly not understating that for a moment, but what can you learn? What can you do in order to find out what your next step might be? And I think that's a good focus to have.
Oh, and, this pause moment for everyone, I think, and that's a great reference point to that is to self-reflect and self-discover about who you are and what you're about, but also, your skill set and your specialty, to actually, throw another lens over it and observe it from a distance to be able to actually get better at what you do. I think in everything we do is a really important time, and often we don't have the space or the opportunity to do that. And I think if you can give yourself that space, you're going to be a lot better off when you do get reintroduced back into what you do, as opposed to trying to spend all your energy, hustling and just trying to get something going and worrying as a chance to actually, if you can, and understand that it's hard for people, but self-reflect and get clear about who you are, what you want to stand for, and just get really good at what you do. I actually think that'll pay off in the long run for people more so than trying to just hustle through and wait for it to end. But mate, I wanted to chat to you about that point of what you said then, was getting buy-in. And I love that statement that you meant about co-creating. And I think that what you said there is so relative for people, because that allows ownership, but you don't want a dependency on your facilitator or your people all the time, 24 hours, 7 days a week. That you want the course or the program. And, I gather with the stuff that you do with footy clubs and sport, that there's, when you leave the office for the day, that's still happening when you're not there. And that's really important for programs, that it's not so dependent on the person's program or them being there that it stops once you go.
Yeah, well, even further than that, Luke, what I'd say is I think the most beautiful stuff actually happens outside the four walls of the office or the sporting club. or the typical 9 to 5. It's the stuff, it's the ripple effects that those opportunities create, especially when we're talking about the culture ones, I suppose, is what I'm zeroing in on here, is that if you can through the work that you do and through the questions that you ask and through the discussions that you introduce and then encourage the group to take on themselves, if you're able to kind of get people wanting to apply those learnings beyond the workday, then that's an incredible outcome. It's all around building capability. I talk to people about, we were talking about success or measurement of success earlier, and for me, an indicator has always been, have you built capability so that people can do it themselves? And you almost sort of, in a way, it's you want to make yourself redundant. You want to be able to get to that point where they're not as reliant or as reliant at all on you to actually be there with them in order to do what they need to do. I think that is ultimate success in any setting. And it's kind of like, it's a bit of a leadership philosophy on its own either. I mean, they say that you can't be a great manager unless you're a great coach. And that's been getting far more emphasis in the last 5-6 years than ever before in the past. Michael Bungay Steiner has got some great work in that space. If people want to have a look at his work online, and also one of the books that he wrote was called The Coaching Habit. Brilliant management leadership book. Just helping provide some frameworks around how managers can become better coaches. And I think that there's a real breakthrough there. And that's not just for facilitators. I'm talking about people who are on the ground working with teams. Is that, do you see yourself someone who barks a lot of orders and gets people to do stuff because you tell them to? Or are you someone who's able to ask some great questions and encourage their reflection and insights that enable them to do their job better? And a lot of leadership programs are trying to incorporate more of that, coaching, those coaching frameworks into the way that they train their managers and their leaders, because that's a critical skill set to have. It's almost, in a business sense, I'm talking about here as well too, is how many managers would actually consider themselves a coach in the same way as a sporting coach would? So a Damien Hardwick or an Alistair Clarkson or a Simon Goodwin or Nathan Buckley. How many managers and leaders would see themselves as that type of figure within their team? And
I think
they're not the ones that are talking all the time, but they're the ones that are responsible for motivation, for asking questions, for supporting growth and development, so on and so forth.
I think, and what you're saying there, mate, which is really important, and the self-reflection, which, I've done with some leaders as well, that a lot of leaders don't sort of see themselves as their primary purpose as a leader is to make their team better, to make their people better at what they do, and to grow them, as that's your foundation of you as a leader. And in sporting, it makes so much sense because you can't play the game, and you need to make your players better. But in finding sometimes in leadership, it's just about telling them what to do or orchestrating the plan and sticking to the vision, and just it's about sort of ticking a lot of boxes. But there's not as you said, there's not enough of an emphasis on, in 12 months' time, reflecting on, is the people that you're leading, are they better for their time with you? Like, have they grown? Are they expanded? Are they more creative? Are they becoming better leaders themselves or better at what they do because of your guidance? And there's a lot of people that I know that are in high level positions of leadership per se, that if they reflected on the people that had sat under them for many years, their people actually aren't getting better because of their guidance by you. They're doing their job and they're just getting by, but it's not through your leadership. And I completely agree that coaching element, but I'd love to know what you think about, obviously, the book that you shared, which I'll put on the podcast notes. But if someone's interested in that, what are some of the first steps to taking that step and having that mindset shift from managing to leading to coaching?
Yeah, I think it's probably asking yourself that question as to what type of, if you are to be a coach, for example, if you are going to consider yourself a coach in a management leadership sense, what type of coach do you want to be? Or in a leadership sense, what type of leader do you think that you are? Because there's so many different types of leaders, and that's people get confused because the textbooks promote one style of leadership often. It's changing, but I'm kind of generalising a bit here. But a lot of the textbooks that you read or the Leadership 101 units that people take at uni, it forms this viewpoint that leaders are all the same, and it's often the type of leader that served us well 50 to 100 years ago, in war, for example, or some of the examples, as distinct from the type of leader that will serve us well today. I think that's where Jacinda Ardern, and it doesn't matter who you vote for, but she's created some amazing conversations, hasn't she, over the last 5-6 years around what great leadership looks like. And it's causing people to, and she's got her critics as well too. But wow, some of the conversations that are taking place now because of the way that she's led her country and led the world in some respects through really challenging episodes, is that people there is a pricking up and they're thinking, gee whiz, maybe my style of leadership wasn't that far off if that's what good leadership looks like. So I think people being able to explore what great leadership looks like for them is really valuable. And not falling in that trap, I always say, Luke, is that a lot of coaches, they discover their authentic style too late and the penny drops, but they can't change the course of their fortunes at that point. Whereas if they had have actually really reflected on who they were as a coach at the start or as a leader at the start of their leadership journey, then they may have been able to live and work in a way that was more true to that. And we've all fallen in that trap. I'll put my hand up. I'm certainly no perfect leader. And, I've had sort of leadership experiences in the past too, where I probably have drifted away from who I was naturally and, didn't get the best result in certain circumstances because I wasn't living in an authentic style. And it's the same for coaching. So I think reflecting on, who have your leadership influences been? And they can be people that people that you've worked under, people that you worked alongside. They could be people that you've read about, a lot of your listeners will be avid readers, and so am I, a voracious appetite for reading and the written and spoken word. So what are you reading about leaders out there and which are the ones that you gravitate to? What do you see of leaders on the TV or on movies or throughout history? What are the leaders or the leadership traits that have stood out? So thinking about that and saying, well, which of those are relevant to coaching? Because some will be relevant to leadership more broadly. Some will be very specific to coaching. And I think being able to identify which of those do I think I need to display? And then how can I use those same traits in a way that's authentic for me? Because it needs to be you. It can't be. There's nothing worse than acting or behaving in a way that's not you in front of a group of people who you need to lead, and they'll see straight through it. It doesn't matter their age or level of experience. Every human has a certain degree of self-awareness, and they'll be able to detect. It's the old BS radar, I suppose. They'll be able to detect when someone's acting true to themselves or not. So I think that's what I'd say about the leadership piece. And in terms of, that what is coaching in its simplest form, there's some brilliant footage. It might get you to put the YouTube link at the bottom of the episode, perhaps, Luke. But there's some beautiful footage online, which I saw, must have been midway through last year, and I'm sure some people have seen it, of this footage at a zoo over in the US. And it was this mother polar bear, and the baby polar bear was running around on the ice. They're in the enclosure in the zoo, and the baby polar bear had never swam before. And the baby polar bear is running around, playful, childlike, completely joyous, and slips into the water, and had never swam before. And you see the mother polar bear just flick into mother action straight away, but not actually grab the baby polar bear and pull it out again. She slips into the water just behind the baby polar bear, not making physical contact, but just letting that baby polar bear know that I'm here, I'm with you. You're not on your own. And then just gradually sort of edges the baby polar bear towards the edge of the water, giving it a chance to find its own natural pattern of movement in that water, doing a skill for the very first time. And then eventually that baby polar bear learns to swim on its own and get itself back up out of the water and onto the ice. And it's literally just 30 seconds of footage, but it's brilliant in the context of leadership, I think, and in the context of a coaching style of leadership, is that coaching is not telling someone what to do or doing it for them. It's actually just making sure they know that they're supported and that the help's there if they need it, but that you're backing them to be able to do what they need to do under a moment of intense stress and pressure, which in that case was the baby polar bear falling into the water. But it's just brilliant because the mother bear, she acts straight away. It's an immediate reaction to what's happening, but it's still calm and composed. It's not a stress reaction necessarily. And, I think we can learn a lot from the animal kingdom in regards to human behaviour and why we act the way that we do sometimes. So I think that's a great little link for people to have a look at. It's a beautiful piece of footage. It's quite heartwarming.
Yeah, mate, I'll put that up for sure. And I think you're absolutely spot on. And what you sort of said a few times there, and it just made me think about, I just listened to, you probably have seen it, but again, I'll share the podcast, but it was the new podcast with Pete Carroll and Steve Kerr, who have just started something. But it was just those two, and Pete Carroll talking to when Steve Kerr was going to become the Warriors coach, and Pete had him at the Seahawks and just got him in and talked to him about how you're going to lead your team. And, Steve sort of had mentioned he focused, and it's in the podcast, about offense and defense. And Pete's like, no, but how are you going to lead your team? Like, what's your style? And exactly what you're sort of saying, it was about having, to find your authentic style of how you're going to lead. And they really discuss it in that podcast in terms of, if you can't, and you would see this all the time in the sport, if you're not leading authentically and you haven't got clarity around that, when it gets tough, you're going to not know, there's an inconsistency to who you're going to be because it's not your authentic self. You're trying to be someone else, but then when the pressure comes on, you're not going to know who that really is. And the players it'll be inconsistent. And the players will become discouraged because they won't know who's showing up. And I think that for me really resonated, and like what you're sort of saying, because people see through that of especially when the pressure gets on, that there's not the real you showing up as that coach or leader. So I think that's a really good reference point for that. And I think it takes us in, mate, in terms of, where have you seen this done well? Obviously, you've got a reputation now of working with the Richmond Footy Club, and they're having an impact on their culture. And, I think you've seen firsthand, not just with Damien, but also with other coaches. Like, it's been a bit more known with Nathan Buckley and a few other coaches that have almost self-discovered themselves mid-career to go, actually, that wasn't the coach I actually wanted to be, or that wasn't the real version of me as the coach, and rediscovered themselves and, added their humility and added their realness and their vulnerability to coaching, and got great results from younger people, especially because of the realness, as opposed to trying to have the mask on all the time and be the perfect coach.
Yeah, well, there's some great examples out there, isn't there, Luke? It's everywhere you look these days. There seems to be someone who, is embracing their imperfections and connecting more deeply with who they actually are, rather than who they think they need to be. And you've given a couple of great examples there from world sport. And there's a podcast. I'm not sure which podcast that was, the one that Pete and Steve were on, but Pete's colleague is a guy called Michael Gervais, who has a podcast called Finding Mastery, and that has some brilliant stuff on it. And there's an episode where Michael Gervais interviews Steve Kerr, and Steve talks a lot about his philosophy around joy and how important joy is in a professional sport context. And you can see that in the way that he coaches, the Warriors teams, or has coached the Warriors teams, and the success that they've had. But you think about someone like Steve Kerr, he played in those famous Chicago Bulls teams of the 80s and 90s that had so much success. And we're seeing on Netflix, every second person in the world's probably watched The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan doco on Netflix the last couple of weeks. But just, if you get an opportunity, try not to pay attention just to MJ, but just watch the broader team atmosphere in and around the Bulls. And you can easily see where Steve's developed that philosophy based on the way that they used to prepare to play. Because sometimes you can add, in the act of trying to relieve stress, you can actually add more stress in that performance setting. So, but they seem to be masters, and from the outside looking in, they seem to be masters at just being able to bring a more natural style to the way that they prepared to play and to perform. So, I think that's the first thing I'd say. And then the second thing, what you said is absolutely right, Luke, is that it's never too late to transform. Is that you have the ability at any stage of your life, to actually change the way that you do things, if you think that you need to. And sometimes it'll be one event that causes you to do that. Other times it'll be a series of events that'll cause you to do that. But you're the writer of your own story, and you have the power to change what those next chapters look like if you think that that's necessary for you to be a better version of yourself, or to do things a slightly different way, or to be able to support a changing generation, for example. I do a lot of work with older managers and leaders in different corporate organisations, and they talk to experienced senior executives who have been doing the role for 30, 40 years. And then all of a sudden they're having to deal with a younger generation who see the world differently to what they were taught to see the world. And there's this genuine fear and anxiety about the way they go about their roles. And it's not surprising to see that, but it's quite discomforting to think that someone who has become so accomplished at something could become a beginner again. But at the same time, it's not discomforting for too long, because what you then see is you see people who tap into a completely another dimension of performance and leadership through identifying things that they can do to pivot and grow and adapt. And I've seen that time and time again. So the old saying, if there's a will, there's a way. If you think that you need to change, there's usually a way to change. And we've spoken about a few of the ways that you can actually do that. But that deep reflection around what type of leader do you want to be, which for me, leader versus what type of person, there's a bit of crossover there, is that the great leaders are the ones that probably lead in all dimensions of their life. So it's not so much what type of leader do you want to be as it is what type of person do you want to be. How do you want people to feel when you spend time with them?
Yeah.
When they walk away from an interaction with you, do you want them to feel flat and depressed and stressed and fearful? Or do you want them to feel inspired and motivated and energized and positive about the steps that are to come? So I think that can be a really useful reflection to make that helps guide some activities and some efforts around, how can I get better and grow and improve as a person.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Shane, I think the work that I'm doing around mindfulness, I think the mindfulness piece adds so well to that. You talk about the aging leader, but, within the mindfulness space of just being present, like that ability to learn to just be present and open and aware is so important, especially when you're talking to young people, is if you can be really curious with them and just sit with them and allow them to have a voice, which, having 5 kids of my own, that's what most people in life actually want, is a feeling of being heard first. And that has been a really crucial practice and step, which is easier said than done, especially when, unfortunately, these leaders that we've had have grown up in a style, as you said, of old style leadership. So their experience and their understanding of leadership is a certain way and really all they know. So the humility to relearn or unlearn old habits is so important for them as leaders, but also for them as people, and often for their well-being, is that if they can unlearn and let go of a lot of that old way, that they're going to be just better off.
Yeah. I think you've touched on a really important component there, Luke, and that's your curiosity. I think it's something that the best leaders do, regardless of their age. I've been lucky to have done some stuff with the Melbourne Storm, and Craig Bellamy, for example, is one of the. I just admire his growth mindset, and at his age and level of experience, you might think that he would think that he knows it all, but he doesn't. He's genuinely eager to learn and grow and improve all of the time, constantly looking at ways that he can go about getting better and finding new ways of connecting with his players and taking his programs to another level. And people might have read, it's certainly been part of rugby league folklore for a long time, is the trips that Craig and Frank Panisi, who's the footy manager at the Storm, do at the end of every season. They go away somewhere overseas to meet with organisations in a sporting sense and in a non-sporting sense to learn about what they're doing and just to glean some insights that they might be able to bring back and apply. And I love that. I absolutely love that. And I think it reflects well on them as individuals. It reflects well on the entire organisation. And it supports that notion that we're all constantly growing. And in the dealing with the young people is that if you enter into those relationships thinking that you know everything and that you're going to be teaching them things, then you're probably going the wrong way about it. It's more about what can they teach you about who you are as a leader and how far you've got to go, because you've always got further to go. There's always more to do. There's always more to achieve. And most importantly, beyond those two, is there's always more of an impact there that you can have. And I think that curiosity mindset is a really powerful one to bring in a workplace context or in a kind of leadership and coaching context.
Do you find, mate, with the work that you do and who you're with, does the learning or the coaching, does that naturally come out? Like once you've got, and I think back to the point where, and I don't know what his name was, but the guy in the similar position with the kids who's, and he's mentioned the three things, but one of them was know your content or know your stuff. And that you'll naturally coach your players or you'll naturally lead from your experiences if you know your stuff really well without having to project it or formulate it, which then does it almost create the space to be curious because you're not worrying about what you're going to say next or worry about trying to get your message across, but you can actually take in their message and naturally the coaching and learnings that you've got to give to that player or to that employee, they'll come out anyway. You don't have to worry so much about trying to manufacture that. That will happen, but as opposed to focusing more on letting them teach you as well.
Yeah, totally, Luke. I think there's a difference between knowing your stuff and knowing it all. And, knowing your stuff's not knowing everything there is to know about that area that you work in, because as you move further and further up the chain in positions of leadership, there'll be less and less that you know. So it's becoming comfortable with that, is that I might be the CEO of the organisation or I might be the head coach and I don't know about this area or I don't know about that topic or I don't know about that person. But provided there's the hunger there to learn more about it, you don't have to be the expert. It's about putting people around you who are the masters of their craft and then together as a leadership team. And that's where we always place too much focus on one person in modern society. We look for the silver bullet, that one person who helped or changed or drove change and improvement. It very rarely is. It's always the combination of people who come together at the right time. And so that's where that community and togetherness piece comes in. It's sort of going back to where we started, was that nothing great can be achieved on your own. It can only be achieved as a collective. And the same is true of any sporting team or any business, is that you need to bring the right people together at the right time and encourage the right sort of conversations in order to get the most out of the group. So yeah, very big difference between knowing your stuff and actually knowing it at all. And I think you're right, is if you bring that mindset that you're wanting to learn more about an area that you might not know everything about right now, or you might be wanting to learn about a different perspective of an area that you already do know about. So that's another healthy extension, is just looking to add to your knowledge base. And that's that relearning piece you touched on before. I noticed that's been getting a lot of focus and attention recently, and it's probably there's so much information out there. It is information overload at times, and we can fill our heads with lots and lots and lots of stuff. Sometimes it's a matter of actually taking some of that out to add some more in, or actually just resorting some of that's already in there and taking on some new bites of information that might add a greater level of clarity or value. So.
Yeah, it's funny at the moment. I'm reading a book called The Tao of Ordinariness, which Pip, a friend of ours, she sort of sent it through to me. But it looks at this concept of creating limits on yourself, like limiting who you are and what you not what you can do, but what you want to do. And by creating limits within yourself and really limiting who you are, then you become limitless within that limit and not trying to be, I think it's so relative to coaching, not trying to be that coach or trying to be that person, but setting a limit on actually your strengths, your skills, what you know, what you're good at, also what you actually love, and then really expanding yourself with humility, with unlearning, with simplicity to grow yourself as a person in that limit to become limitless. And I think that's, for me, like, it was a bit of I think Pip sent it through because it was an aha moment, because it's all based around purpose and fulfillment, and that being the foundation of life, not trying to attract and get 1,000 things, but being really comfortable within your own skin. And when I'm reading the book, I'm thinking about yourself, but also thinking about the work you've done, with NRL and with Richmond and stuff. That I'd imagine that's really central to that, to those cultures, that there's clarity on who they are and what they stand for.
Yeah, that's a pretty complex topic, that one that you've touched on. I haven't read the book, so I'm not sure exactly what's in there. But I think you're right, Luke. And maybe part of that is, before you, there is always something to go on to, and so before you move on to that next thing, it's spending a bit more time to celebrate, I think is probably the right word. Celebrate that first thing before you move on to the next thing. I wonder whether that's linked to what you're saying there. Is sometimes we'll, learn a new skill, or we'll complete a course or achieve a task, for example. And as soon as we've done that, if we're driven people, and most, let's be honest, most people are, who work in and around these industries at the highest level, that they are driven to achieve and to be high performers. So when they achieve one thing, they very quickly move on to the next without first taking time to really savor and celebrate that first achievement, however small it might be. And, that's where I think, maybe we could spend a bit more time in that space in between the growth, as a way of just fully appreciating, how powerful it is what we've just done. And then just to help pave the way as to what that next step might be. Because if we were to give ourselves more space, maybe we wouldn't take that next step. We'd take another step that might be better placed for us in the context of longer term achievement or fulfillment. So, I think it's a powerful notion, and one that we all should think about on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I just liked it because I think, we see so much. We've got access to so much information now, that we see someone doing something that looks amazing and, is awesome. And then we think, oh, maybe that's what maybe I need to do that, what that person's doing, because they that cafe looks like it runs awesomely. Maybe I should open a cafe. But the reality is that person probably, what they're saying in this book is that person loves food, loves people, and that when they bring all their attention to that cafe, it'll be successful. But if you don't have that in your purpose and your love, then you probably won't find happiness opening a cafe if you don't really like food and people, just because you want that because they've got it. And that's a bit I think is really important, is that when we can find us and what we stand for and who we want to be, and we really play in that space, and that could be a very expansive space, and yours and mine might be around developing people, but that's sort of becomes our sphere of limit, and then we can expand that into a variety of areas, but knowing that we've got a framework for that, of where we're going to put our energy. I think that's the notion of the book. And I think the celebration, which you've mentioned a couple of times, mate, I'd love to tap into that, because I feel that there's a lot of people that, in sport and in work, that there's a feeling of discontent. Like there's a feeling like there's, no matter what they do during the day, it's not quite enough. Like they're going home feeling like they haven't achieved enough, or there's not enough to do. And that if I feel content, or if I celebrate, that's a feeling that that I'm taking my eye off the ball, for instance. And love to know, better than anyone on this space, in terms of what does good celebration look like, where it allows people to really savor the moment, enjoy it, but also be hungry for more growth.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. I think going back to your earlier question about the comparison piece, and people reaching out for stuff, trying to achieve things just because other people have got them, I suppose, that's the perennial problem, isn't it? And it's the old shiny toy syndrome.
Yeah.
And the book, a great place to start, I think. And it's a bit cliche suggesting this because it's such a popular book, but I just love it. And it was one of the, I read it many, many years ago. One of the great personal development books, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma. Is a great place to start, isn't it, for people who are wanting to just reflect in a simple way around some of those areas of their life about prioritisation. So I think that's a brilliant thing. There's a quote. I don't want to misquote him. I think it was George Bernard Shaw, but it may not have been. He said that comparison is the thief of joy. And I think that's a powerful quote, isn't it? To just sort of meditate on that and think, well, what is it that I'm currently, sort of searching for that I'm trying to find in areas where I'm probably best placed not, or is the way I'm going about trying to find this thing necessarily the best path, or are there other ways to find it? And I think that notion, if you fall in that trap of comparing yourself to other people, you can very easily chase a rabbit down the hole of unfulfillment and in a lot of cases sadness, as distinct from just really trying to connect with your story and why is it, maybe even like, why do you want what you think you want? Or are there other ways to go about trying to get that? So, I think that's a terrific reflection for people to have and encourage people to ask themselves those questions. And the piece about celebration is, for me, it's probably gets a bit to what we were talking about earlier around just finding your own way. Is that there's no black and white gold standard in terms of the way to celebrate. The important thing is that you do, and the important thing is that you don't move off it quickly. I think some people are of that view that it's overindulgent to celebrate for too long. I'm not so sure about that. I think it's kind of like the essence of who we are as humans is the ability to do stuff together and to have fun and to actually enjoy each other's company. So now we can enjoy each other's company in a number of different ways. It's also probably reframing, the bad times. So we don't just celebrate after we achieve something and have that be the focus of our attention, but maybe even looking at the tough times. A lot of teams will go through lows as well as highs. So looking at those lows as opportunities to come together and enjoy each other's company more. So you can celebrate through the bad times as well as the good times. I don't think that that's out of place at all. In fact, I think that can be quite healthy. It might actually ensure that you get through the bad times quicker and in a better shape, more unified shape than what you went in. So, but I think that, giving the group the opportunity to define how they want to celebrate is a really important part of that. Again, not imposing it from the top. It's not going to be a top-down thing. You want it to be complete alignment, top-down, bottom-up, everyone involved all the way through.
Mate, how do you hold that tension? Because you've been at some successful sporting clubs over, and for me, the sustainability over a longer period of time and had extended success. So and what I mean by that is, how do you maintain that? Whereas say for instance, Western Bulldogs win a premiership and then don't make the 8 the year after, for whatever reason, but then clubs or even organisations that can have extended or sustained success over a period of time, say for instance Richmond at the moment or Hawthorn a few years back, where they can hold that level of performance and continue to grow culturally and within their playing or within their leadership over a longer period of time. How does that sort of, what's the background behind that in terms of maintaining?
Yeah, well, it's probably not limited to just sport. I think it's any industry. It's in business as well too. It's even in schools. You know, you see it in an education setting where certain schools will get really good levels of, you know, academic achievement over a long period of time, and they develop a reputation as being the school to be at, for example, through the teachers that they've got, or the results that they achieve, or the environment that they create. It all gets back to your people. I think that's the that might sound a bit overly simplistic, Luke, but you know, I think it's having that focus on bringing really good people into your organisation. It's developing those people and making sure those people understand the value that they bring, and being able to invest in them in a way that they can see that there's a future there for them, and that there's a value there for them to add. Now, for some people, that'll be a long-term contribution. For others, it's more of that contribution of coming and going. So they might not be able to be there for a long period of time, but they know that when they're there, their intention is to make a really strong positive contribution, and that they'll then move on somewhere else and they'll make a strong positive contribution there. So, yeah, I think that emphasis on people, really good people, and you know, some people will. Will have the ability to bring others up as well too. So making sure that you've got the right people there at the right time to actually get the most out of the group. So and I think that it's also the way that you transition people out of the organisation as well too, regardless of what industry you work in. You get good people in, you invest in them to make them the very best that they can be, personally and professionally, and then they have such a positive experience that when it's time for them to move on to the next challenge, that they still speak incredibly positively about the experience that they've had during. And I think that you see the integrity of leaders can be judged often by the way that they treat people on the way out the door, rather than just on the way they treat the people on the way in. There's some brilliant case studies of some of the tech startups from Silicon Valley to that end, and talking about people who, you know, Steve Jobs is probably a high profile example, but there's plenty of others whereby, you know, some of the big tech giants, they gave people an opportunity to make a contribution. They then moved on to another tech company, and then they came back later on and they helped take that same organisation to another level. And I love that. Because too often you hear about people who have a really sour exit experience. And in sport, the reality is, in professional sport, your career can't go on forever. So, you know, it's going to come to an end at some point. There's a minimum requirement for clubs in the AFL, for example, and it's the same in the NRL, to turn over a certain number of players each year. And so that's hard. That's really hard to have to do that. But what you need to be able to do is make sure that you've given that person every possible opportunity to fulfill their potential. But more importantly than that is that the programs you've put in place enable you to have helped make that person, or help that person make themselves a better person. And I think that you know, is that higher standard that we should be aiming for, not just in sport, but also in business and in education and in government as well too, so that people can have a really long and fulfilling career, rather than a long career that's punctuated with small amounts of fulfillment. Is that it is possible to have that over the length of a career, rather than just these short periods in between. So, but it's a good question, Luke. It's a really good question. I haven't necessarily thought about it to that level before in the past. So, yeah.
And how much weight, mate, do you place, like you guys, especially in that welfare area, but, you know, culture as well, how much weight do you place on, I suppose you can't do it while they're playing, but like when you reflect on players that have been at the club and been successful, or been there for a period of time, that what they go on to beyond football or beyond rugby or onto their next job and be successful in those arenas and those areas, that's an impact on the culture that you created for them. Like, is there any time spent on that within sporting clubs and the organisations that you work with that then reflect and go, actually, you know, that person grew, and hopefully we contributed to that growth of them being better beyond us.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a great indicator. And it's almost that first question you asked today was about success and KPIs. I think it's a brilliant indicator, is the degree to which people are able to transition out of the game, out of professional sport, and into that next phase of their career. I think we've seen a big shift in that over the last decade in the kind of welfare and education space, whereby the emphasis used to be on the transition part, was trying to prepare players or athletes for when their career came to an end. Whereas now the emphasis is much more, as it should be, on how do we help them thrive throughout their career, because then it won't be a transition at all, or it won't be as much of a transition at the end, because they've actually been preparing themselves for throughout their whole career for that moment of their career. And that might sound a bit counterintuitive to some, but I think that the evidence points towards that being the right approach. Quite a few good friends who are psychologists, and they certainly advocate that approach as well too, around helping people thrive throughout those years of their career, because for some that'll be 3 years, for some it'll be 5, for some it'll be 10 years, but you're actually constantly trying to help them get to that next level, so that when the end of their career comes about, that next transition, and it might not be the end of their career, it could just be the end of their career at that club, moving to another club. Or for someone in a professional setting, it could be the end of that job, moving into another job. But it's not a transition at all, because they've almost always been preparing themselves for that day. And I think that that's really healthy. So, that is a really good indicator. And I think beyond that, Luke, it's also the willingness that they've got to come back as well too, is that they see themselves as having really contributed to the foundations of that organisation, regardless of what industry it's in. And then at some stage in the future, they'll want to come back again. And, you talk about player alumni, and that's a big thing over in the US, is where players might play at 3, 4, 5, 6 clubs. We don't see that as much in Australia. It tends to be, particularly in AFL, you get a lot more 1 club players or 2 club players. But in other sports around the world, they might play at 5 or 6 different clubs throughout their career. And you want them to always be welcome back again, is that they see that time that they spent, however slight it might have been, whether it was 1 year or 10 years, they still feel like they've helped contribute to that team and the culture of that team. And from that perspective, they'll always be a part of the place. And I think it's a funny one, isn't it? Like a lot of teams celebrate premierships, and they have premiership reunions as if it's only, you're only validated to have a reunion when you have the ultimate success. But isn't it important regardless of whether you've won a premiership or not? And I know that might sound a bit silly, because clearly, you're involved in sport to try and win, and winning's great. We all love winning. But, it doesn't mean the team that finishes runner-up, they don't try any less hard, do they? They haven't been beaten in the grand final because they didn't try, or they weren't good enough to make the grand final because they're there. They just fell short. If they get beaten by a point, does that mean they don't deserve to celebrate? And that's a bit of an alternative viewpoint. But I think in the context of culture and that past player piece, is that every player that contributes to an organisation's culture should always feel welcome to come back again. And there's some really high-profile examples of teams in other sports around the world who put a big focus on that area, and they're able to create an extended club network that helps them be at their very best as an overall sporting organisation. So I think companies can do that a lot better as well too. Some companies do that really well, where they'll have like a past employee program where they'll bring past employees back, regardless of how they exited the company. They'll bring them back at regular intervals just to reconnect and share memories of the good times and meet those old colleagues that they either have kept in contact with or haven't kept in contact with. And I love that. The professional services firms do a little bit of that, a couple of them. And, I just think it's a brilliant concept, because often someone might spend 10 years with a company and then they finish up after 10 years and then they never again go back again. What a waste. That's 10 years of your life. You want to be able to go back. Some people might not want to, but I think to at least have that option is a really healthy thing. So I'd love to see more of it in a corporate setting, not just in a sporting setting.
And I think, mate, if you've got a skill set and you're not directly competing. You might get, you might be, you might work in an area of a company and you might go to another company that's not a direct competition. If you've got that relationship and that welcoming back or those connections to your past employer, A, you know the culture of that business, and B, if you leave on good terms and there's still a live connection there, you've got probably so much that you could give back to that company from what you're currently learning, because you know the culture. That I don't think enough companies really tap into that in terms of keeping those connections alive and flourishing. In terms of, hey, I know you're working on this and it's completely separate, but we're having, what do you think about this? And keeping them together in that, because as you said, in the American sport, they do it really well. But I think in the Australian ecosystem, we tend to, set and forget, and that's it. So,
no.
Mate, I think before we go, I'd love to just talk to you about your journey a little bit, and sort of, how you've got to where you got to. Because again, I think there's a lot for people to learn about you, and we spoke a bit about that limit or that clarity, but you being really clear about what you wanted to do and what areas you wanted to play in terms of sport and leadership and culture. But for someone, especially in this time, mate, not sure, or they're in a stage of resetting themselves, like, what's some of the things that you'd really highly recommend about finding yourself and finding your purpose or a bit more meaning in what you want to do, to take the next step, especially when restrictions ease and we start to get back to some sort of normality of whatever that looks like. But have you got any ideas or thoughts that have been really helpful for you on this journey?
Yeah, I think it probably gets used a lot, but that notion of following your passion is clearly a key one. Now, that can take different shapes and forms, but I've been lucky that I probably didn't always know exactly what I wanted to be doing, but I knew exactly the area I wanted to be working in. And for me, that was never sport. That was, I always loved sport, but it wasn't so much the game that I loved. It was the environment of the game. So it was the teamwork aspect. It was the piece around bringing people from all walks of life together to achieve something, to keep fit and healthy, and to work towards a common goal. I love that. And I think that that's the foundation of not just sport, but effectively every team setting that we could possibly be a part of, whether it's a community group or a school community or a business, and regardless of the business that it is. So, yeah, I grew up in the country, little town called Rochester, a couple of thousand people, fantastic, tight-knit little community there, a couple of hours north of Melbourne, and very proud of my upbringing. And sport was always a big part of country life. But I also loved the fact that in the country, people do things together, and it's almost like a team within a team, if you like, is that, when times get tough, people kind of band together and are able to achieve things that go far greater than just the actual numbers of the people that are involved. It's amazing some of the things that do come out of the country in that regard. So, yeah, I'm very proud of that country upbringing. When I was about 14 or 15 at school in Echuca, the great Tommy Hafey, the legendary premiership player and coach, came and spoke to us one day as part of a workshop, and a leadership workshop. And Tommy was probably one of the first famous sporting personalities that I've ever met, and I was just completely blown away by him that day. And it wasn't the fact that he was a premiership coach or a premiership player or an AFL person. It was more his messages. And the thing I loved about it was it didn't matter. There was a lot of people in the room that day, a lot of young people in the room that day, men and women. And it didn't matter whether you knew AFL footy or not. Everyone was blown away by the messages that he shared with the group, because they were messages about life. And I remember sort of thinking that day that that's the kind of thing that I would love to do as a career, is to help people think about life in a different way. And so my purpose is very much to help people think differently and make positive change in their lives. And that drives me day to day. And clearly you can apply that in a range of different settings. But I made that decision very early on that, that was what I wanted to do. It wasn't without my constraints. I used to have speech therapy as a kid. I had a speech impediment, which really held me back in the context of self-esteem and confidence and mixing with peers. So I was always probably a little bit different in that regard. But it made me very determined to want to overcome that. And so, took steps towards just trying to become a more confident speaker to start with so that I can engage with people in a different way. And at secondary school, not long after that, kind of interaction with Tommy, I started to do some public speaking and debating at a time when the boys at school never used to do that stuff. It was always seen as a girl's pursuit. And even that, I looked at that and I said, that's just not right. It's not right that guys are not doing this stuff, because this is incredibly valuable for young men to help develop, healthy habits, but also to be able to have an impact on the people around them, is to be able to have that grasp of the written and spoken word. So there are probably a couple of milestones there around your 15, 16 years of age when I started to make some decisions about doing some things that would be stepping stones to what I might like to do later on. Had an opportunity at the end of year 12 to go straight into study or to study part-time and work. And that gave me the ability to study commerce and psychology, but also to work at North Melbourne Footy Club in the AFL, and learned a lot at that time through that 6 years where I went down to Melbourne as a 17-year-old and still a boy in a lot of respects, because I was a year younger for year 12. But to be able to grow from a boy into a man in the context of an AFL environment, and that was really the starting point for me in a professional sport sense. And then I've been lucky that my journey's taken me outside of sport, back into sport, outside of sport, back into sport, in Australia and overseas over the last 20 plus years now, so that I've been able to mix with people from all walks of life and develop a framework, if you like, or a set of principles that I use in the work that I do, which is always falls back on an evidence base around the culture and leadership side of things, but also has that quite unique personal flavouring, I suppose, based on my own story and the interactions that I've had along the way that have caused me to see that unique style of delivery is always going to be the one that has the most impact, rather than the one straight out of the textbook.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good insight, mate, into you, I guess, and your values, and knowing you quite well and spending a few years with you. That for me, and I would love to talk to you about that importance of then you being authentic to yourself. And it sounds like the debating story was the fact that you had the courage to not follow the status quo, but also to do things on your terms. And what does that sort of look like for you now in terms of clientele and working with people? How do you go about making those decisions that they sit within your values and your authenticity?
Yeah, I think there has to be some degree of alignment. I also like challenges as well too. So I think that when we step into a challenge or an environment where we're actually not sure about what the outcome might be, that's good for us. So kind of growth in the discomfort, if you like, and so there does have to be an alignment of values in terms of the key leaders of the organisation. But if it's a younger leader, for example, or it's someone who you think has enormous potential, there may not be a complete alignment of values at the start, but you can see that where they might get to is a space whereby you can achieve great things, or they can achieve great things. That can be worthwhile as well too. So it always is a bit of a decision to be made. I find the deep work the most enjoyable and fulfilling. So rather than doing lots of little individual pieces of work, is that the most rewarding work is always when you can get to know someone or a group of people, and you can develop those relationships over a period of time. Because that way you then, even though you're independent and impartial and objective, which is the role that I play if I'm working with an organisation, because I have to be there to challenge, to support, to be the sounding board, but to also ask the questions that need to be asked. from time to time is that you aspire to be a part of the journey as well too, because it's a big part of your own life. So you want to be involving yourself with people who you like and get along with, and you feel like that they're making the same types of positive contributions that they're what you hope to make. So you always look to align with brands and companies and organisations who do reflect those similar value sets, but they don't necessarily have to be exactly where they want to be at the start, because I think that the journey part is the piece that's most rewarding. And that's where I think that the power of shared experience, Luke, is a really valuable one, is that you might not have had a lot of positive shared experience. You might have been an experience of kind of negativity to that point. Like you might have had a lack of success, but is shared experience a shared experience? And the power of people going through the bad times together as a group can be incredibly unifying. And that as a platform to work with can be very powerful. Often people try to wipe that from the memory. But if you actually tap into that and get them to see how that's their story, as an individual or as a team, then that can potentially really shape well what you move into and focus on in the ensuing months and years.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, and I think that's probably one of the key takeaways from this conversation. There's a Buddhist teaching that's called going against the stream, and it's exactly what you say. And when you said it, just reminded me that, we're so built and we've been programmed to avert, to push away discomfort and to lean into and cling on to and attach to comfort. And as you sort of said, that is when we can go against the stream and actually look at the discomfort and use that as a shared experience, we actually can sit with that pain and suffering and actually learn from it. Exactly what you're saying. It's really powerful. And when knowing that, if you work at a club or with another leadership, that there will be more pain and discomfort at some stage. Like working with you or working with me or whatever doesn't mean that it's, rainbows and fairy tales now because everything will be good. That there still will be suffering at times. And when we can learn a way to lean into that and learn from it, in a healthy way, that we're going to be in a lot better shape.
Without a doubt, yeah. And even, excuse me, in the midst of all of that, we'll be having lots of fun and it'll be joyous and childlike, and that's okay, and that's good, and that's healthy. One of my favourite authors is Ernest Hemingway, as I'm sure it is for many people, and his book Old Man and the Sea is one of my absolute favourites, and I just love it from a range of perspectives. It reminds me of the battle, the battle between man and beast, the man and the fish, but, it kind of is that metaphor for life in a way, and that constant tension that we have between kind of who we are and who we want to be and who we think we need to be and so on and so forth, which that book represents it for me. And he's got a beautiful quote, which I think is quite powerful in the context of what you've just said then, but also what we're going through right now. And that is that now is no time to think of what you do not have. Think of what you can do with what there is. And I think that focus on what you do have, what you can do, what you will do next, is really valuable. But also not taking for granted what you have had and your past and the situation that you're in, because that's a great platform to work with as well too, as a springboard, if you like.
Mate, I think we'll finish it on that, because I think there's a lot there, and I really, I do appreciate your time for this. I know you're a busy man, and I've been wanting to do this podcast for a while. So thanks for coming on, mate. And, I think if people, I'll put your links below in the podcast if people want to, find out more about you. I know is your podcast up and going here, or is it about to launch?
No, it's not going as yet. Watch this space.
Right.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
It
will. I would have promoted it for you, but I can't.
No, pleasure to be on, Luke. And I think you're a very caring person, and I don't do a lot of this stuff, but was happy to jump on and help out, because I think that the work you do and the orientation you have towards helping people, be at their best and make meaning of some of the rough spots in their life is a really important part of who you are. And so it's a pleasure to be on and share a few insights with you that might help people.
Mate, awesome stuff. Thanks heaps for that. I really do appreciate it.
No worries, Luke. See you.